Here's the kicker.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this series of Voices in Transformation. This is us talking about some of the biggest things that are happening in the supply chain industry now and having thought leaders here share their vision, their ideas. I want to thank you, Don, for joining us here. So why don't we kick it off by you introducing a little bit who you are and what you're doing?
Sure thing. Maria, thanks for hosting me, having me on your podcast. It's great. My name's Don Hicks. It's my good fortune to be the chief executive officer of a company called Optilogic. Optilogic is making headways and innovating in a field called supply chain design, which I expect we'll talk a little bit more about. Optilogic is about a 5-year-old company. Prior to that, I founded and ran a company called Lamasoft for about 20 years that gained some amount of fame and notoriety before crashing and burning. Happy to talk about that as well.
Well, it looks like we're going to have a great time having this conversation. So let's kick it off because you bring up supply chain redesign. Now, you really emphasize the importance of doing that, of doing a redesign of the supply chain instead of just planning it. So I guess my question is, why is now the right time for companies to prioritize the redesign of the supply chain over planning it?
Sure. I'll tweak your question a little bit because it implies that one should do one or the other, that one of them is top priority. And if I'm out there preaching anything these days, it is that design and planning are both mission critical. And the way to think of it, right, we end up having to talk a bit about what is design versus planning. So let's kind of dive right into that. The way we think about it is the design of any system and decision makers, supply chain executives. These guys have the awesome responsibility of managing and improving a complex system. Complex system being a supply chain, a whole set of activities and processes that drive a business to deliver, to manufacture, source, deliver the goods that make their company work and that satisfy their customers' demands. Okay, and that complex system has a design. It exists. When you're planning that system, it's all the decisions about how do I run it? What do I do next? But you're making all these decisions constantly, every day, every week, every month. But you are managing and running a system that already exists, a supply chain that's there. Most of the time, you really don't have, unless you explicitly pull back and look at this supply chain that you're running, you're stuck in it. You're managing from within the system. Design is really the discipline of taking that step back and saying, what is this supply chain that I'm trying to make the best of, and how can I improve it? What if things were different? What are the problems that I keep running into? Now, you don't get to, if you're busy flying an airplane, you don't get to just pause it in midair and then look for a better wing or try to figure out a better engine. But at the same time, if you never go back and look at the redesign, you're stuck flying the same plane that the Wright brothers built. Okay?
Yeah.
So you really, for the modern enterprise, for an executive that is trying to be at their best, you have to make the best of your supply chain through planning and execution. And at the same time, go take a step back and reframe it and look at the design of the very system that you're managing. And what sets companies apart and what sets executives apart these days from sort of good to great and truly excellent is the knowledge and the ability that their organization can both operate a design capability and a planning and execution capability. That is it's hard to do any one thing right and to do one thing well. To do two things well is what makes you excellent. But it's necessary. We've got to do it.
There's so much to unpack in what you said, but it echoes a lot of the conversations that I have with a lot of senior executives in the supply chain industry. Good enough isn't good enough anymore. These are different times. This is not, as I like to say, your grandpa's supply chain, right? We are living in a world full of crisis, full of risk, full of things being thrown at us at all speeds at all times. And I like your analogy about being on a plane. I kind of like to say that during the pandemic, it was like trying to run a supply chain was like trying to change the tires in your car while you're driving on the highway, and it's on fire, right? So we're
Yeah,
not in
that's
that
right.
crisis anymore. So I guess what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that the executive that operates in 2024 and beyond, in the kind of world that we live in today, needs to take a step back, needs to ask themselves that question of, is this the supply chain that I want? So my question is, do you think that the pandemic and the events of the last few years have accelerated this type of thinking within the boardroom that is now leading into supply chain?
I think we are in a sweet spot right now. And what's funny is I would challenge us both and the listeners. If you go back to what was written in 2015 or 2016 or 2010 or the year 2000, what you'll see and what you'll hear is we live in an unprecedented time of change and crisis. And it's never been like this before. I remember omni-channel. I'm old enough to remember the internet will change everything. If you go back and look, every year these executives are faced with, hey, I've never seen this much change before. Hey, this is a watershed moment. And the thing is, that's all true. We in the supply chain world, we're always managing through crises. That's what we
Yeah,
do. If there's no crisis, things just go smoothly, and then you can take a vacation. But supply chain folks, we know that that's not true. There's always change. The
yeah.
pandemic was such a dramatic, such a unpredicted event that changed everything all at the same time. It stuck in our minds. It caused everybody to say, "Look, these things come out of nowhere." What Do you? I'm not sure if you remember the black swan from Nassim
Of
Taleb,
course.
which is
Yeah,
that the notion that every now and then you get something weird happen, something in the tail of the distribution that can't be predicted, and yet they're always happening.
well,
So
this is what I
when I
call,
mentioned
sorry, Don,
sweet
this
spot,
is what I
yeah,
call the flock of swans that we're dealing with at the moment. We're no longer dealing with a one black swan event. We're dealing with constant change, a lot of things at once. So,
I agree with you, Maria. But where I would tweak this is to say, I don't think that constant change is itself new. I think that
no,
this has been going on. This is constant change, but it goes back. It's always the environment when we're trying to move things and distribute things and get things to our customers in a real changing world. The river is always changing and it's always the same, right? Now, the pandemic gave us a unique opportunity where it forced everybody to really stay home, change what you're doing, and that set of crises grabbed the spotlight so much that for that stretch of 3 or 4 years, things changed so dramatically, so quickly. Nobody was looking ahead. Nobody was even sure what happens after pandemic or when does that happen. And we're living in a time right now where there's a ton of change going on. Some factors we can talk about that are, you could say, unprecedented, but things go, the pendulum swings back and forth always. But right now, executives are in a spot where we can remember what it was like to be in pandemic, but we're not enthralled to it. We're not living through it right this minute. And what has happened is executives are always aware of risks and these sort of low probability events, but we kind of write them off. If it hasn't happened recently, we forget and we get back to sort of the day to day set of changes. Right now, we're out of that pandemic era, but we still have a clear memory of what it's like to be disrupted. This is a golden moment. You've got change going on. You've got to run your supply chain, but you remember what happens when you're susceptible to huge risk. And I'll just point out some of the things that are driving this as well. For decades, we had a global consensus about dropping trade barriers, about making it more integrated, that supply chains around the world are becoming fully integrated. And that has changed over the last 5 years. We're in the middle of the early stages of something that I've heard called deglobalization, a pulling apart into micro markets. Now, your supply chains are all stitched together, which is why if you have a weather event in the Far East, it affects port prices and port congestion in the East Coast of the United States. We're so entangled right now, and that's been a good thing. But what happens is that now people are aware of the risk. What I think this is, it's not a change in the overall amount of change in the world. It is a rebalancing of the primary characteristics of these systems, of the service that gets delivered, the financial performance of a network, and the risk involved. Risk has not been something we talked about. It's been something we report, but people have generally not made change in their network to account for risk. And guess what that development means? It means spending a bit more. If I know that there are risks inherent and I need to keep them in my mind, I'm going to have to pay for insurance. I'm going to have to keep inventory. I'm going to have redundant sources. Right now, the executives that we're talking to, some of the largest companies in the world, they're aware of the risks and they're willing to trade off. Hey, I've got to back off of pure efficiency because I remember risk because I just lived through it 4 or 5 years ago. It's an incredible time to be aware of the long term while managing the short term. And that makes it that design is a deliberate process.
So this unique opportunity that we're living in right now, this window that you talk about,
Yes.
this is the time for executives to really look to create that competitive advantage, especially in the face of ongoing crisis and great speed of change, whether it's because of technological change, the pace of technological change, just the change in, for example, consumer behavior, deglobalization, all of the pressure points that are happening all at once. However, I bet that there are still some executives that are saying, that have short memories, that will say, well, we're out of the woods, we're out of the woods now. Let's go back to normality. And I use it in quotation marks. Now, in the ebook that we did together, which was great, and I enjoyed our collaboration, one of the things that we talked about in the ebook was that if you know your company's supply chain design for 2025 and 2026, it puts you in the top 20% of executives. So what are the key strategies or tools that can help executives achieve this kind of foresight?
Yeah. Well, thanks for citing the ebook too. It's a tremendous process, and we're really just getting started with this conversation, in my view. The thing to think about, the first thing is an understanding of the differences between design, planning, and execution. These are traditional issues, but they're still not very well understood. Okay. I would say about half of the executives that are out there are really getting this message, and the other half are picking it up. And it's not always the executive's fault. If you're busy in the middle of firefighting, you really don't get a chance to pull back and say, was this building designed to make it easy to fight fires? Okay. So it's not a fault of any individual, but at the same time, we must get better. Supply chain executives are responsible not only for solving problems, but for the company's ability to respond to problems. And that part leaves you susceptible. If you haven't relooked at your design in the past, you don't know where you're susceptible to fires or to problems coming up. Now, to pivot though, and towards what does excellence look like in this field? The thing you have to think about it, the number one concept I would want to get across to the executives, the supply chain executives that are listening to this or thinking about this, is that design is not a one-time deal. You're not going to get a design and now you're check done. The environment you're in is always changing. So the ability to redesign, that capability, that is what you're building as an executive. You're not just fighting a fire or solving a problem. You have to think in terms of a strategic capability to solve problems, to redesign permanently. And that requires, some reflection and some self-awareness, as well as thinking about and caring about the long-term success of your organization. If you just care about the short term, you will never be great at your job. You never
Yeah.
will. You can solve problems, but you're not really leaving a lasting legacy or an impact. And this opportunity is for executives to realize I'm going to not just redesign my supply chain. My company needs a capability to continually look ahead, look at the redesign, to incorporate change at a strategic level up and down the supply chain in its actual design. And that capability means I have to get an organizational function, a team that works inside, and that all the people may change, but the processes and the knowledge continue. If I make that contribution to my company, I have left it better able to respond now and in the future to change. When wouldn't you do that? Well, when the world settles down, becomes static, and there's no more change, then you can shut your design team off and you don't need them anymore. We don't live in that world. This has become, and design has become, a mission critical capability for your organization to survive over the long term. If you don't care about surviving in the long term, then you don't need design. If you honestly care about your company surviving and thriving, you don't get to just be great at planning. You must have this design capability to look 3 steps ahead, to be changing the network so that it's a choice, so that you are getting in front of this. And when you do these design type changes, the bigger changes to how your network operates, you're always pushing out that efficiency frontier and making it easier for planners and the people managing the supply chain to do their jobs. But you have to be very self-aware that design is not the same thing as day-to-day planning, and you need both.
Do you think that the reluctance that maybe organizations or senior executives may have to consider redesign is down to an element of fear because the supply chains have become so complex and, as you said, so tangled up together that it's almost like this Gordian knot that you're trying to figure out how to unpick, that maybe it's better to just leave it in the dark? So that's part of question one. And question two is, what is the risk of not doing this? Because you talk about thriving and survive. I want to maybe talk about the dangers of not considering supply chain redesign.
Yeah, no, that is a great points. Um, let's talk about the notion of fear for a second. Um, Supply chain executives make decisions that affect the real world. And well, I wouldn't call it fear. I would say when you run a system where bad decisions cause trucks to go to the wrong place or factories to shut down, it makes you a little bit more risk averse or a little bit more hesitant to take big swings and make mistakes. There's nothing wrong with being afraid of making a terrible mistake that crashes your company. Supply
Hmm.
chain executives live in a real world where ships can go to the wrong location or ships can go to a route that causes them to be susceptible to be sunk. Okay. It will kill your business. And there are many other places, I'll just throw these out there, in IT and finance and in sales and marketing, where you can make very rapid changes. In supply chain, we deal with the physical world. Physics underpins everything we do. Moving things, transforming real materials. When we make bad decisions, bad things happen and they're obvious. And I believe it's made an environment where supply chain executives are very hungry to innovate. Like they want to innovate, but they are risk averse because real things happen when the vaccines don't get where they need to be. That's a supply chain problem. When materials don't show up or were ordered the wrong way, it might sink my company. Supply chain executives have good reasons to be risk averse in decision making. but at the same time, they get very trapped by this. So it's not a fear of sort of unknown or complexity. I think this is the advancements in the field of access to data and powerful modeling technologies, including AI, but also optimization, uh, data science in general. These things have transformed the ability to model what if scenarios. Executives can now, and it's not a special out there R&D project. A supply chain executive with a reasonable team and some good partners can expect to be able to model their extended enterprise at the SKU level, the order level, and at the shipment level to do what if analysis and simulations. That's remarkable. We've seen this promise for decades. It's here now. You can do it. It's not science fiction. It's not even particularly cutting edge, in my view. It's just something that can be done if you do it right and you manage the process right. But that requires a spinning up this capability that is different from the day-to-day, and it doesn't always seem like you have to do it. Like, what's the imperative of getting in front and doing contingency planning? And if I can stick with this metaphor, I'm trying to draw these threads together. I think one of the problems, or one of the things holding people back from leveraging supply chain design further, is the difficulty of making a simplistic ROI discussion on this. If you're looking at two roads and one of them is going to cause your company huge amounts of problems and, lots of cost, and it might even sink your company, and then the other one, things are smooth sailing. If you choose that second path, what was the ROI of not taking the first one? You may not even know how bad it would have been to take that one. You see the problems, you make the changes, you avoid those problems. What is the return on an investment for a path you didn't take, or for getting a network that could then be operated better? There's a real hard time when people, especially finance-driven procurement processes, want to know how much money is this going to save, and it's the wrong question. It shows simplistic thinking to say, save me money, because in the supply chain world, we are balancing service and financial performance and risk. And the fact is, sometimes the answer is, this is going to cause us to spend more money so that we can manage these risks down. And insurance is actually the way I think of it. I'll sometimes challenge executives. I'll say, okay, everybody here, who drove to work today? And everybody raises their hands for the most part. It's a lack of public transport. And then I say, well, how many of you guys have car insurance? Everybody raises their hand. I say, well, how many of you got in an accident in the last year? Thankfully, usually it's either nobody or very few people. And I said, so for the rest of you, why did you pay for car insurance? Why don't you just cancel it? That's wasted money, right? I can save you ROI. I can cut your costs by having you stop paying car insurance because you didn't need it. And usually that gets the point home. In supply chain, we have to spend and invest in ways to reduce or offset risk. If those risks don't materialize, we didn't waste that money. We used it intelligently to offset risk. That kind of thinking is almost foreign to look at supply chain as a set of investments up and down the chain. With design, it forces you to articulate risk and to decide, I'm going to spend here, I'm going to reduce risk here, as an intelligent designer. If you are simplistically saying, how do I cut costs? All that happens is you load up on risk. And we live in a time now where it's not about reducing costs only, it's about balancing spend and risk. That is a more complicated, a more sophisticated way of thinking about a complex system. And the executives that do it are doing their companies a great service.
Well, this is an interesting point because I've been saying for a long time that I think that we have to foster more cross-functional collaboration to drive real innovation and transformation in the supply chain. That means that the supply chain exec needs to understand the language of the finance exec, and the finance exec needs to understand the language of the supply chain exec. And I think I've interviewed quite a few CFOs in the same room as supply chain people. And what I think people get wrong about the CFO is that they think that finance is only interested in cost cutting. Maybe that's because the finance team has always driven that message home, right? But the reality is the finance person is completely obsessed with mitigating risk. And so if in supply chain we learn to have a conversation around not only cutting costs, but also learning to drive value and mitigate risk, then we are getting on the same page as the finance team, which will then get on the same page as the CEO, and the board of directors to really drive competitive advantage and shareholder value and be able to excel as an organization and go beyond good to great.
Yeah, look, Maria, I love it when the CFO is in the conversation. And you said it almost exactly right. CFOs are obsessed with, you said risk mitigation. I would call it risk management.
Yes.
Sometimes you load up and you increase risk. Sometimes you spend to reduce risk or contain it. But senior level finance people and CFOs, they always know there's no such thing as a free lunch, right?
Yeah.
I've got to spend to make it manageable. They look at alphas which is the return, and they look at betas, which is volatility. And supply chain, we lived through that, but we haven't tended to quantify it. Instead, if you go look back at the last 20 or 30 years of reduce inventory, cut spend, let's go lean. Now, lean is a fine manufacturing approach. It's a fine approach to many operations. But if you just run around eliminating inventory out of dumbly without knowing what you lose, people say, well, you got rid of waste. Well, just because I didn't need that inventory today doesn't mean it was a waste to have it. It's called insurance. Finance
Again, with
people
insurance, yeah.
know this. They know you spend to offset risk. And in supply chain, we get so obsessed with some of these visual cues. We just need to let it go and take a more sophisticated approach. Think like a CFO if you're running your supply chain. It's a portfolio of risks that you manage, and you've got to tweak it, and you've got to invest in it. How do you look at that systematically as your portfolio of operational risks? You look at it through the eyes of a designer, a supply chain designer. And
A
that
hun-
is what we're all about. That's what my organization is all about, is partnering with companies to get that worldview in there. There's lots of technological answers to it. We're not the only people in the world that make software to do this stuff. We think we're the best, but you don't actually have to have the absolute best to do a great job with this. We're a bit on a mission to help supply chain executives take it to the next level and pull design in so that they can think like a CFO as they manage the entire supply chain.
Don, this is exactly the kind of thing that creates that sophisticated supply chain executives, that sophistication that you were talking about earlier. It's about operating in supply chain, almost like the supply chain 3.0, or whatever it is that we're looking at, which is what's necessary in the world that we're living in now. I want to briefly touch upon AI because you talked about it. Everyone's talking about AI. I mean, it's just is what everyone is talking about.
Hype cycle is
And
peaking.
it's peaking tremendously. And I don't think it's going to go away too quickly, But what you were saying is that you argue that AI isn't necessarily going to drive supply chain design. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about why AI isn't the central factor in this process?
So, first of all, AI is a big bundle of technologies. Okay. It has, there's a class of them called large learning models that has seized the public imagination. You're in trouble when people are doing TikToks about AI technology. These large learning models have accomplished something that we thought couldn't be done in the past, which is to have a computer program come up with responses that sure do feel human-like and that weren't pre-programmed. It's a tremendous innovation, these large learning models, and we're just starting to figure out all the places we can use them. Machine learning has been around longer, and that is really taking automated approaches to say, I've got a bunch of data. What are the patterns in my data? What can I extrapolate out of what I've previously seen? I can't eyeball them. I can't model them, but maybe this new class of models can automatically find the patterns in the data. That's another set of technologies. And there are others going back to neural networks and even expert systems. These are enabling technologies because they don't solve a problem out of the box. They can be applied to solve problems. I love that. That is our field. That is what we want to do. But it doesn't just sweep everything away. The robots are not about to take over and let you go on a permanent vacation. Humans will be in the loop in various places. And let's lean in on this a little bit more. In supply chain, with planning and execution, we have to run what's actually happening, and we're faced with so much data every day. Humans have a very hard time to keep up. Okay, the pace of data has been increasing radically over the last couple of decades. So automating decision making is a really, really positive thing to do. Okay, I don't want to have to run to manually make every single decision in the supply chain every day. The more that I can rely on automated decision making, the faster my organization can respond in real time to changes. But it is reliant on the patterns of data that's already happened in the past. Okay, that's the dirty little secret about pattern recognition is you got to use last year's data. It's always starting from the past and trying to extrapolate as if I'm still running the same system. In design, we're changing the network. We're changing the supply chain, which means the data that I had about my current one may not be relevant at all to how my new one will operate. I'm going to use AI selectively as enabling technology, but AI isn't going to tell me what to do or what my supply chain should look like. A human has to be able to look ahead and know I don't have past data, but my future is going to look like this. My context for what my CEO or what my board needs in the future is driving me to do this new thing. AI sucks at engineering new things.
Yes, it does.
Humans incorporate this because we are envisioning what might be in the future, even if I don't have data from the past. So I'm a huge fan of AI. We're investing heavily to incorporate AI and LLMs and machine learning throughout, just like we've been investing to use discrete event simulation, stochastic modeling, linear optimization, mixed integer programming, nonlinear optimization. We'll use any tool that's available, but it's all in the service of a human decision maker. And in design, that has to be the end goal, is to enable a human decision maker to envision and quantify anything that pops into their head. Humans are not going away. In design, we are the ultimate architects. The closer you get to planning and things that can be predicted based on past data, the more you're in the realm of automating those processes, automating those technologies using AI. So again, I'm a huge fan, but you got to think right tool, right job.
Yeah.
Focusing on envisioning design and future what ifs, that's a great use of the human mind. Automating day-to-day decision-making and planning is a great use to let the robots take over and we get to be their overseer and hopefully keep an eye on things and do exception handling. And that is where, honestly, this is where companies are mostly going. But there's no silver bullet in terms of design. The human, that is where we're going to be, and that is probably the best use of our amazing minds.
Don, it's been a great conversation, and I want to thank you for being here and sharing all your thoughts, and I look forward to collaborating further with you.
Maria, thanks for having me on. Keep on doing what you're doing. I love it.
Thank you.